Let's face it, fishing ain't cheap, and with the cost of living these days, we're all looking for ways to save a little bit of money in all of our activities. We're going to talk about how you can save a little bit of money in your fishing on this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. I'm Chad LaChance, and you're listening to Fishful Thinker, the podcast. All things fishful, all the time. Hey y'all, Chad LaChance here. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. Yes, we're going to talk about saving money, and no, we are not going to talk about catching less fish. We're going to figure out ways to help you save a little bit of money by maybe not burning as much tackle or some other things along the way in your fishing endeavors. And we posted this question on our Facebook a little while back, the Fishful Thinker Facebook page. Love to have you check that out if you're so inclined. But we posted the question, got a bunch of responses. Some of them I expected, some of them I did not. Some of it was new to me. Some of it I've learned over 17 years of being a fishing guide, where you can go through a lot of fishing tackle and some ways to save money there. And just in general, on fishing trips overall, maybe not in the actual act of fishing. So thought we'd go through for the next 25 or 30 minutes and talk about some ways you can cut a few dollars out of your fishing budget without cutting a few fish out of your catching budget. So we're going to jump right into it. If you're a boater, first of all, you already spend a lot of money on fishing, and I fully get it. I've been a boater for most of my life, and gas ain't cheap. I run a 250 horsepower motor on the back of my boat. It will drink a lot of gas. First thing I tell people, the burn rate on the motor is more than double when your speed more than doubles. So if I drive around in my boat at 35 or 40 miles an hour instead of 60 miles an hour in my Ranger bass boat, literally my burn rate is half or less. So that in and of itself, just slowing your boat down in all of your endeavors will save you a lot of money. And I don't think I really realized it until I got modern outboards where I can watch the burn rate on the engine management system the whole time, and you realize that next 10 miles an hour burns a ton more gas, and the next 10 after that burns a ton more gas than that. And at the end of the day, I can save a whole bunch of money by loping around at 35 to 40 miles an hour. Incidentally, when I started doing that, one thing I learned quickly is that I could be also more observant about what I see on the water in any given day, and I think it's actually helped me catch a few more fish and not stress as much instead of being really focused on a bass boat going 60 miles an hour. Now, you might not have a 60 mile an hour boat, but whatever boat you have running at more reasonable speeds will definitely help you a whole bunch. Along those same lines, trolling with your electric motor, if the wind will allow you, can be another great way to not burn any fuel, or just let the kicker motor put along. If you happen to have a kicker motor, use the kicker motor more than the big motor, unless you just need to use the big motor. Again, your burn rate will drop a lot. So that can be a big difference right there in and of itself. Of course, with your tow vehicle, we don't need probably to mention that too much, but inflate your tires, check your tires, make sure they're inflated harder than you think, because an overly hard tire will cause some tire wear issues, but a soft tire will cause you fuel economy and also tire issues. So keep that in mind. Same thing with your trailer tires. And also, if your trailer has brakes, make sure they are not dragging. I have literally destroyed 2 sets of trailer brakes over my career, both by them being dragging slightly and me not realizing it and overpowering it with the truck, and therefore smoking the brakes off. Well, I got to think I burned a lot of gas before those brakes got smoked off of the trailer and I had to replace them, which in and of itself is expensive. So gas things aside, those are good things. If your motor's not running very clean, understand potentially that any of your filters will help you, and spark plugs especially will help you get a cleaner burn. It might be worth spending some money on some spark plugs and replacing them so that you get a cleaner burn rate and you can save some fuel there. So that's all I'm going to talk about as far as the gas burn. And gas is so expensive right now that every little bit helps as far as that goes. And so we wanted to talk about that first and foremost. Next thing is fishing line. We go through a lot of fishing line. I go through miles of fishing line every year. Between all the different rods and all the different styles of fishing we do when we travel around and film for Fishful Thinker television and on my guide trips, I go through miles and miles of fishing line every year. So I've got a few tips on that. If you're fishing braided line, which I do a ton of, and it starts to lose its color, or you're getting a little bit little bit low on it, let's say, that you've cut some of it off and the spool's not full, what I like to do is take, say, a size 30 spinning reel with braid on it, take that braid off of there by winding it onto a size 10 or a size 20 spinning reel. It's a little bit smaller, and it will then be on there backwards. So in other words, the part of the line that you've been fishing with the whole time will now be at the bottom, and the fishing line you haven't been fishing with will now be at the top. So you will have brand new braided line and a full spool because you moved it to a smaller reel. Excuse me, another possibility would be to put it on the same size reel or even a larger reel by using some backing on that reel to fill it up. I'm not an advocate of an underfilled spool for any reason, but you can put some backing on there and then tie your braid to it and top your spool with that, again reversing the braid, and you can use the same braid going the other way by doing that. Along the same lines, the backing, particularly if you buy little filler spools, the little 300, 330 yard spools of fishing line that we sell a bajillion of at Sportsman's Warehouse. If you're using that size spool, it's very, very common. You're going to have a tail end of it that is not long enough for you to do anything with. Save it for backing or save it for leader materials, as the case might be. If you're talking about fluorocarbon or monofilament, save that last 30, 40 yards of line to either put backing on a reel or for leaders. And that's very common for me to use the end of a spool of fluorocarbon for leader material, unless I need specific leader for a specific thing. In other words, leader material is traditionally stiffer than traditional monofilament. If I really need a stiffer leader for something, okay, then maybe I need purposeful designed leader material. But if not, there's no reason that I can't use that leftover Trilene XL or XT or whatever it is you use for monofilament or any of your fluorocarbon for leader material or to back a spool when it comes to backing. Incidentally, I'll have all my reels backed always. When I take a new reel out of the box, the first thing I do is back them, and I top them with braid. Braid's expensive, but it lasts forever. It doesn't break down in UV, and it doesn't break down from absorbing and drying process either. So braid can be really good, but because it's expensive, I don't want to use any more of it than I have to. So I pretty much guarantee that any kind of normal fishing, you don't need more than about 75 or 80 yards of braid on your spinning reel. You're not going to cast it that far, and if you get pulled down into your backing, as long as you have a good backing knot, maybe you hook Shamu and that thing pulls a bunch of line, well, that's fine. As long as your backing knot's decent, you'll be fine. I tie the same backing knot that I use to tie my leader knot, so it doesn't in any way, shape, or form stress me out if my backing knot all of a sudden gets pulled out by a big fish. No different than I wouldn't stress over my leader knot. So a little tip on that too, if you are going to go with the braid to backing or even mono to backing, as the case might be, or thin fluoro, any of them, I back all of them. I'll get all the way to put my backing on, tie my braid or my top line to it, my running line to it, and then I will put a piece of electrical tape all the way around the spool right there. What that will do, two things. It will, for one, insulate the knot so you don't have a bump right there that will try to catch line if you do cast closer to that knot. And two, it will prevent you from having any sort of backlash any deeper than that, whether it's casting tackle or spinning tackle, such that you're not going to lose a whole spool line if you tangle something really bad, something like that, or you get broke off way out there or something like that. That tape will help you a whole bunch because it also helps you recognize where your backing is, so you know that you're starting to get closer to it. So backing and reusing braid is very important. I want to tell you right now, I am not an advocate of keeping nylon monofilament in an effort to save money, because lures cost more than line. And if you break off 2 lures because your nylon monofilament is, say, a year and a half old and it's been exposed to sun and it's been exposed to water and it's lost 20 or 30% of its breaking strength, which nylon monofilament will do whether we like to admit it or not, any nylon monofilament from any manufacturer, then you lose a couple lures, you're now in the negative. So if you're going to use nylon monofilament, put some backing on, use no more than you need, and replace it on a regular basis, because it will break your heart. Braided line, not so much, and fluorocarbon line somewhere in between the two. Fluorocarbon is more UV resistant and it doesn't absorb water, so it lasts longer than nylon monofilament, but it doesn't outlast braid. So keep that important. Also along those same lines, keep tension on your spool when you cast, run your bail manually. Pay attention to slack line. If you get more questions on that, go to my previous podcast because I talked through a whole bunch of those things that I see routinely people do on guide trips that tangle my stuff that shouldn't otherwise tangle because they aren't controlling slack. But that's another podcast for another time. Again, we already did that one. But if you learn to control your slack line, you're not going to tangle nearly so much and you'll be doing really good there. So enough on the line. Let's talk about some other possibilities. Fish your confidence stuff. If you have certain lures that you're confident in, make sure you have them. But manufacturers are going to hate me for telling you this, but you don't have to have one of each. Old lures work great. In fact, there's a lot of times where I have lures that go all the way back to high school and I'm 50 plus years old. You can use your older lures. If you're confident in something, make sure you have them in stock, but don't feel like you don't have stuff because you haven't bought the latest and greatest widget that hit the market. I'm not suggesting you don't try things. I'm suggesting that if you're going to try a new lure, buy one of them and see if you like it. Don't buy 5 of them and then find out it's, because you want different colors or whatever, and then find out that it's not really the lure that you much care for anyway. So that in and of itself will help you just to keep your tackle minimum. Another thing, back to the gas thing too, along those same lines, less tackle in your boat and less weight in your boat will equal less fuel burn. I'm very, very picky about boat's performance, and therefore I keep the weight that I store in my boat, even though it's a 21-foot boat with a 250 horse motor, I don't store nearly as much tackle in it as a lot of other people do. I don't carry as much spares. If I'm going to be running around my home lake, I don't carry a spare prop. I take as much weight out of the boat as I can. I don't want to fill the live wells. I make sure my live wells are on recirc unless I need them. I don't want the extra water in the boat to have to haul it around and burn that gas too. So kind of got off on a tangent there, but same idea. Keep reducing your tackle in your boat, and reducing your load in your boat will help you in that regard. Along those lines, you don't have to have 10 kinds of sinkers. You don't have to have drop shot weights and blah, blah, blah. You can do amazing amount of drop shotting using only split shot. And the reason I know that is I get clients on guide trips and I need them to understand bottom contact. And for them to do that, they're going to snag a bunch. So if I buy specialized drop shot sinkers, I'm going to go through a bajillion of them. What I found is if I just clip some split shot on the line, I can go through those quickly. They pull off the bottom really easy. If they snag them, I can put another one right on and keep going. In that case, I generally tie a small overhand knot right at the very bottom to keep them from sliding off too easily. But as soon as they're hung, if you point the rod at it and pull just a little bit, they'll come right off of there. A hint on that too is to space them out a little bit, so have them be maybe an inch apart and you won't snag as many of them, surprisingly enough. So if your drop shot leader is going to be, say, a foot long or 18 inches long, well, maybe the bottom 3 inches of it is my 3 smaller split shots instead of one big one. You don't get as much point loading going on and it won't snag as much and you won't lose as many of your split shot. Same kind of thing with some of the finesse rigs, like like a quote-unquote Mojo rig. You don't have to have the Mojo sinkers or a little split shot rig. Same thing. Just get the cheap little split shots, crimp them on the line, and go through as many of them as you want, and you will be fine. It's not going to create a big difference in your fishing when you do that. Another thing that I think can help you out, back to the line thing, is buying line in bulk, particularly braided line or fluorocarbon line, and then storing it. If you buy 300-yard spools, you're going to have invariably tail ends of those spools. If you buy a 1,500-yard spool, well, yeah, okay, it's going to cost you a bunch up front, but it'll last a long time, and you're only going to have one scrap at the very end when you're all done. So that really can help you out right there. Is to buy bulk spools. They're cheaper in the first place by a significant margin, at least per yard of line, let's say, and they're also more efficient in terms of less waste. If you're going to do that, store them in like a rubber container or something in your garage, like a big Rubbermaid bin or something. Keep them dry, dark, and cool if at all possible, and it will last for a very long time. So that can be a good thing, as far as keeping your line together. Let's say you fish with soft plastics a bunch. Parts of soft plastics will still catch you fish. When you're catching lots of fish, you're going to go through a lot of soft plastics. I don't care if you're walleye fishing or bass fishing or whatever. You're going to go through a lot of soft plastics. So if I'm fishing something like a 8-inch rubber worm and it won't hold my hook anymore because I've got a Texas rig in the front of the worm and it's worn out and I've caught a few fish with it and it doesn't want, I'm not going to throw the other half of that worm away. I'll keep them, I put them in one big bin, and then maybe I'm smallmouth fishing and I only need 4-inch worms instead of 7-inch worms. I cut the end of it off and keep fishing with it. Same kind of thing with a soft stick worm, something like a Senko style bait, or we fish with Berkley's The General, whatever. I think Yum Dinger makes one. There's a bunch of different ones. I only use the Generals, but this concept is the same. When they're worn out and they won't stay on there, guess what? They make fantastic Ned rigs. Can be a good call. Let's say you're fishing with something like a 4-inch swim bait, like a power swimmer, something we commonly do. Same thing, it won't stay on the jig head. Well, guess what? Now it's a 2-inch power swimmer. Maybe it's a trailer for a spinner bait now. Maybe it's something that's going to go on a beetle spin, whatever. I don't throw away pieces of plastics, almost never, because I can always repurpose them for something. When you're out fishing around. If it's too small for a good summertime largemouth worm, well, maybe it's a perfect smallmouth worm, and then you cut it down from there. So that can be an excellent thing as well. Along those lines, if at all possible, I would like to get fish to bite hard baits because I don't have as much consumable gear. So the first thing I'm always going to try to do anyway on principle is get fish to bite on something I can retrieve, because I can cover more water with it and I can catch more fish. World famous Kevin Van Dam, they asked him why he crankbaits and spinnerbaits so much. He says, well, you catch the most fish winding. Well, get it, absolutely. The other thing is you go through the least amount of tackle and spend the less amount of time messing with your tackle. So if I can catch fish on a crankbait, a spinnerbait, a jerkbait, a topwater, something like that, I'm always going to do that over a soft plastic rig. Similarly, if I can catch them on a jig, then I'd rather do that than have to catch them on a Texas rig, because again, I won't use as many baits, and that can be really important. Along those lines, a small tube of super glue in your boat will do wonders for keeping baits on your jigs and on your hooks. In general, just glue the head of them on and they'll stay on there a lot longer. Even if you get a bait that's torn up, you can put a drop of the Gorilla super glue on it and wait 30 seconds and lo and behold, you're good to go again. If you're going to wacky rig, take a small piece of shrink tubing, of 3/8" shrink tubing, okay? Cut about a 1/4 of an inch of it or a little bit less. Put that over your soft stick worm like your Senko or whatever, and then shrink it on there with a lighter, and now put your wacky rig through the middle of that bait crossways through that little piece of shrink tube. The bait will last pretty much all day at that point. You can skip it anywhere, you can catch as many fish on it as you want, and it ain't coming off. And it's better than an O-ring trick because it'll still come off, you'll still lose some baits, and in my mind, more importantly, the hook is perpendicular to the bait, so you end up with a better hookup ratio. So that's a really good trick for saving you some line, or some baits, I should say, that will help you out a whole bunch. And you won't go through near as many worms either, so you don't have to carry as much tackle if you're going to go that route. But I think that using some tricks like that can be really good. Another thing that will help you save money is to keep your rigs basically simple, less bells and whistles and less stuff stuck on them. So, you watch tournament bass fishing on TV and they got every bell and whistle known to man on their bait, right? They're sticking little weights in them and painting eyeballs on them, just all this other stuff. That's great, but you don't have to have all the ancillary stuff. You don't have to buy those little O-rings, and you don't have to have eyes on everything, and you don't have to buy you don't have to have a bead on your Carolina rig, and you don't have to buy bobber stops. You can tie a uni knot around your line with a piece of scrap line. Just take a piece of scrap monofilament or fluorocarbon, tie a uni knot around your line, and that becomes a magical bobber stop. You don't have to go buy bobber stops and deal with all of that. That'll help you out a little bit. It's little things like that will add up over the whole deal. Another thing is, if you're really trying to save, and it's something I advocate anyway for a long time. Fishing doesn't have to be exotic, and it doesn't have to be travel, and you don't have to be at the best bass or best walleye lake or the best trout stream in the whole country to scratch your itch, I should say. If you like to fish 3 days a week, well, maybe 2 of those need to be really local and you don't spend as much time on them. If you're going to go for a weekend with buddies, maybe you stay home and fish some of your local lakes and milk that for all it's worth. You might have to change your tackle a little bit as far as like take your lighter tackle instead of your heavier tackle so that your stuff matches your conditions. But at the end of the day, you're still fishing. And make the challenge about getting the most out of that body of water instead of saying, okay, I'm going to drive 100 miles to such and such trophy lake and get after them. That's fun. I love doing that. I've done that my whole life. But if I'm in a whole summer of looking at how much travel I do and I cut 30% of that travel out without cutting 30% of the fishing out by fishing more locally, well, then I'm way ahead of where I would be otherwise, and that can be a really great thing as well to do, to go that route. If you're talking about trying to save money overall, another thing is cut your road costs out in terms of eating out or eating. If you're a tournament guy, carry some food that you can cook at your hotel room, out in front of your hotel room or something. I have been very, very guilty in all of our travels when we're filming or when I used to fish tournaments or whatever of just going out to eat because it's easy. I don't have to have as much stuff, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, you're going to spend a lot more money by doing that. The gas stations that you pull in and you just have to have that big gulp and whatever, well, maybe you have a cooler in your truck and it's got your soft drinks in it and you bought a whole bunch of them for cheap at the Swill Mart and you don't have to worry about it because you've got them. You don't have to go spend $4 on stuff at the convenience store every time you go by there. Another possibility can be to avoid having to have brand name of every piece of thing out there. So for instance, if I'm looking at a really high-end jerkbait, oh man, that mega bass is $20. I promise you that you can catch as many fish on a Berkeley Stunner at $8 as you can on that $20 megabass. I guarantee it. And the biggest thing comes down to confidence. If you're confident in a bait and you're willing to throw it, fantastic. Then throw it and do that. But you can buy a lot of lures from brand name manufacturers that are similar in style or performance to some of the boutique manufacturers that don't sell as many baits and therefore charge a lot more money for them. Same thing with tungsten. You don't have to have tungsten. I have not seen a situation where a guy's going to catch a whole bunch more fish because he had tungsten stinkers and I didn't. Yeah, maybe if you're ice fishing because you can reduce the size of your stuff, but those things aren't expensive. I'm talking about the bass guys that are paying $4 for a tungsten sinker. For one tungsten sinker. You don't have to have that. That old lead sinker caught thousands and thousands of fish before tungsten ever was available to anglers. So keep that in mind as well. Everything doesn't have to be the very top of the line. Yes, if you're a high-level tournament pro, it does. Other than that, it definitely does not need to be the extreme top of the line for everything that you do. That's a very much a misnomer, and it's something that I and other professionals have been guilty of for years, and it's because we're jaded. We get all kinds of tackle and we get to play with a lot, and you'll notice, yes, there's an improvement. If I'm fishing with tungsten, yes, it feels a little bit better. Yes, my bait's a little smaller, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to let it affect my confidence. I'm going to pay closer attention to other details in my presentation, and I'm going to be just fine as far as that goes. Another thing is if you're looking at buying rods and reels, particularly rods, let's say, if you're talking about something like a finesse jigging rod or a drop shot rod or a flipping rod, a pitching and flipping rod, then you need to spend some money and get a high modulus graphite and get a really good quality rod and be better off. If you're talking about winding a crankbait, then I can get away with a much lower modulus of graphite. In fact, I can even benefit from it. That rod doesn't cost nearly as much to buy. So consider, I don't need a bajillion-dollar rod to present a crankbait or a lipless crankbait or whatever. I'm not saying there's not an advantage to it. Of course there is, but we're trying to save some money. At the end of the day, your crankbait rods and the rods you wind stuff with should be your least expensive rods and save your money for your finesse and your presentations that require ultimate insensitivity. That's an excellent thing to save you some money right there. So if I've got $200 to spend on a couple of fishing rods, one of them might be $60 and the other one might be $140, because the $140 one is going to be my jig rod and the $60 one is going to be my crankbait, spinnerbait, whatever / rod, because again, I'm winding it, and it's all that really matters. Another really important thing, and this is again involves spending a little money to save a little money, is get yourself a plug retriever. A plug retriever, I'm not talking about the kind that are on string that you can drop down to the bottom and get baits with. Those are difficult to use, for one. For two, you got to be able to get the boat right over the top of it. Even if you're a shore angler, I use a Frabill 18 foot, I think it's 18, might be 15, don't quote me on that, extendable plug retriever. It's basically like a golf ball retriever with a corkscrew on the end of it. That corkscrew goes around your line, you extend the pole to whatever length you need, and you can reach up and reach out and get your bait. Incidentally, that thing will also get your baits out of trees, because you can reach up to it, whereas the other retriever will not. It will get your bait off the bank if you're in a boat. And I mean, I would never do this, of course, but if you were to accidentally throw onto the bank 3 feet above the water, I don't have to break a trolling motor prop trying to get it back or break it off and leave it there. I can take my plug retriever and I can extend it out and get my bait back. My Frabill extendable plug retriever has saved me, I would venture to guess, into the thousands of dollars, or close into the thousands of dollars, in the 10 years I've been running the same retriever, which ironically I'm sad because it recently blew out of my boat just the other day, and I had to get another one on order, but it's okay because I'm well ahead of where I was before. Those things are invaluable. The other thing that they'll do is keep that one magic lure that you're catching fish with all day, keep that handy. When we're throwing hard baits on guide trips, that thing stays on the deck all the time, because I can get baits back. I'll let clients throw them wherever they want, and I usually want them throwing them close to cover or close to structure or something like that, and I can reach 15 feet down or out or up to retrieve that bait back, and that's an excellent excellent way to save a bunch of money. I think other than that, a lot of the stuff is paying attention to when and how you buy. I mean, all the stores, we work with Sportsman's Warehouse, invariably there's big sales. Stock up on consumable items when they are on sale, and then store them. Consumable items being line, hooks, sinkers, stuff you're going to go through a bunch of. When they're on sale, buy a bunch of them and store them, and then don't worry about it. By being intelligent in your buying process, you can definitely save yourself a lot of money in that scenario right there. So maybe there's a big sale on fishing tackle at your local Tack-A-Rama. Well, that's great. Then buy a bunch of bulk spools right then, save yourself some money. Online coupon codes, same thing. Credit card miles, same thing. Buy some tackle with that if you need to, and that will cut some dollars out of your fishing. But at the end of the day, I'm going to leave it at this. There's lots of ways to save a little bit of money here and there. And when you save a little bit of money here and there, let's say I save 1% here, 2% there, 1% here, I can save 10% and 15% total by piecing it all together. The nickel and diming yourself is what gets you the little waste here and there. You think, oh, well, it's just a couple of half of plastic worms. Well, but after 4 days of fishing, you have 2 free bags of plastic worms. They're just smaller than they were before. So consider it that there's small fractional increases or decreases, I should say, in your spending that are helping you out. And at the end of the year, you'll count up all the money. You're not going to save a big chunk on any one thing, but you might save little chunks over the long haul and save a whole bunch of money. So, guys, it's not the most fun topic in the world, so I'm going to keep it a little bit shorter than that. Nobody likes the cost of living these days, so we're going to leave it right here. But if you guys have any questions about any of this or anything else, you can email me, chat@fishfulthinker.com. I'd love you to join our social media at Fishful Thinker on both Facebook and Instagram, and especially our YouTube channel. That's at Fishful Thinker, and we're on Altitude Sports Entertainment and World Fishing Network like 5 days a week all year long, so check us out there as well. We'd appreciate it very much. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Fishful Thinker, the podcast.